Hello, here we go. Talking about the Camaro. First off, want to say, brink of speed. Glad you got your Camaro SS1LE. Happy for you. Seems like you're enjoying that car very much. So, yeah, welcome to the Camaro side of things. I'm sure you still love your C8 convertible now. Went from the coupe to the convertible. So, that seems to be a more convenient way to go as far as just dropping that top off at a push of a button. And also Hot 1 LE, just got yourself a new ZL1 in red, just like your other Camaros. Yeah, happy for you as well. Wish you all the success with the channels, both Hot 1 LE and Brink of Speed. Be sure to like and subscribe my channel as well if you're a fan of those guys. We do Camaro content, and then now with this video we're doing Corvette content. C8 Corvette content to be exact. I kind of don't stick to one particular topic, that sort of thing. I know for successful channels on YouTube, they usually stay in their lane, whether it be cars, health, politics, whatever. But I'm a kind of Renaissance person, so I like to have many different interests. So it'll be a fun ride no matter what we're talking about. Come along and subscribe and like, comment, notify, all that good stuff for YouTube. Yeah, it's been a while since I made a video, so I just wanted to do a Camaro versus Corvette video for this time. I got to rent the C8 Corvette for a day, so I have a day's worth of feedback for you, which isn't the most amount of feedback, but I've had my Camaro SS1LE since December 2018, for all of 2019, 20, 21, 22, and now halfway through 23, so 4.5 years of driving the Camaro SS1LE. I have about 40,000 and change miles on it. So at least with the Camaro, you're going to have a very thorough type of feedback, where the Corvette feedback is more of a, like I said, just like an initial type of impression. Let's go. Camaro SS1LE 6th gen versus C8 Corvette Stingray. Z51 pack, by the way. Let's start with the Camaro. All right. Now, the Camaro is obviously that traditional GT design, right? You can still get it in a true coupe configuration, not like the removable roof target top like the Corvette. You can get a true hard top with your Camaro still. And you can always go with the sunroof, which I'm thinking about if I ever switch out my 19 SS1LE for a new one or a ZL1. I'd be heavily considering that sunroof, but in all honesty, the amount you use it, I still don't think I would use it too much. I don't like a lot of light coming in the cabin. I do kind of like that hunkered down tank type of vibe you get with the coupe of the Camaro. Being in California, I'm limited on what I can do with window tint also. Yeah, I do appreciate a traditional coupe where you can still get, and then the hood is shaped differently too with the traditional coupe versus the sunroof, where it has these body lines come up to the roof, kind of the reverse mohawk configuration, where the sunroof, it's more just a flat roof. But you can also get a soft top convertible also with the Camaro, so that's something that's still available with Camaro. They haven't gone to a total hard top configuration with that. The soft tops are kind of on their way out. The hard top convertibles are becoming more popular over time, but I think they probably perfected that soft top just through years and years of having soft tops in cars. So yeah, that's also I think a really good option for the convertible lovers out there, which I know there are a lot of, because if you just grew up in a certain era, probably the more Generation X folks, tend to like those convertible configurations. Yeah, so I believe the Camaro being that 4-seater soft top, I heard on another video that it's the fastest 4-seater convertible in production, the ZL1 being that. Basically, yeah, the Camaro SS1LE or ZL1 or the V8 versions, also the V6s and the V4s. I think it's something to be said when Randy the track tester guy that has all these lap records at Laguna Seca and does like Pike Peak runs. It's something to be said that he has the turbo 4-cylinder Camaro 1LE, to where I'm sure that's still a very enjoyable car. It's a lot better on gas and that sort of thing. So, if it's good enough for him, I'm sure it'll be good enough for me. But when I pulled the trigger 4.5 years ago, I always wanted that V8. It's a part of the Camaro vibe, is having that push-rod V8. That's when people talking about if they're going to put the new Z06 motor in a Camaro. I don't know. I think a Camaro kind of has to have that bottom end pushrod V8 sound versus like the Z06 flat plane crank sound. But I'm sure it'd be cool in its own right also. But I think just the nature of the Camaro basically calls for that throaty, torquey V8 pushrod. I think the hugest thing for me is that it comes in a manual versus the C8, which doesn't, right? As you can, see through the trending throughout the years, manuals are on the way out, obviously. You can even get that Camaro SS1LE in that 10-speed automatic, which is, I'm sure, faster, keeps the motor in the power band and all that sort of thing. But for me, what I enjoy the car for, the manual is really the way to go. Just being in control of that motor at any time, being able to pop it in neutral and give it a few revs when the time calls. I've just basically been driving a manual for 20 years. So for me, I'm not sick of shifting yet. I'm sure if I get to a certain age, as some folks do, they just get tired of shifting. I'm not there yet. So I really enjoy that part of it. That goes a lot to just like, even in parking lots when you're just kind of like coasting along, you don't want to be in gear. You can just like coast along in manual, listen just to that idle V8 sound as you're cruising by. I think there's something to be said about that where, the 10 speed and stuff, you just have two pedals. So they kind of, something about it limits the car as far as the enjoyability, for me at least. You know what I'm saying? Whereas like if you have the auto, 10 speed auto, or say, you're talking about the C8 Corvette, you just have those two pedals. It's either gas or brake. So I don't know. It just kind of, it cuts down the engagement factor for it, whereas, say you're revving up that Camaro SS1LE and you're just hitting those shifts with the shifter and, with the clutch and everything. There's nothing like it, right? I think there's a clip about Joe Rogan talking about, just slamming the gears in, and the Days of Thunder clips where, the pedal, the clutch, the shifter and everything, like it's just such a romantic kind of experience for the driver being a manual. So that's really the main factor, or one of the main factors that I really enjoy the Camaro for. And then obviously the Camaro has tremendous style. People talking about how great it looks. I have that 2019 version, which has that flow tie, which not a lot of people were a fan of. And then they changed it for the following years, 2021, 22, 23 now, probably 24. Obviously, they're going to stick with it now. But yeah, that 2019 has that flow tie, but it still has the same front end as it currently does, just a different position on the flow tie. And mine being all black, there's no difference between the front bumper and the body color of the car. So it's has that monochromatic look. And then also with the 1LE splitter and wheel and tire setup, brakes and everything, it really saves that whole look to not look so weird. Even I think Rady's Rides mentioned that 2019 SS 1LE looks a lot better than just the SS, especially in black, in my opinion. So yeah, there's that, and yeah, just the 6-speed Tremec with that shifter. That's huge, right? Just kind of hopping around here. People talk about the trunk for the Camaro, that like the opening is really small. I haven't had an issue with that, and what I want to do one of these days is show you guys how I could fit an entire drum set into that Camaro, and I'm sure I can. I've done it in my my small Toyota Tacoma truck with a little extra cab. I've done that so many times that I'm super sure I could fit a 5-piece drum set in there. No problem, with cymbals and even the throne. I could put the bass drum on the front seat. I'll show you guys that one of these days. But yeah, that opening isn't an issue for me. I'm always able to squeeze stuff in, and then you can pull down that back seat. Because when I went to a guitar lesson the other day, to fit my entire guitar case in the trunk, I had to pull down that back seat, and it fit in there so nicely. It's almost, you kind of like shock people when you like pull out something big out of that trunk. And I also fit 4 new tires in the car as well when I went to go have the tires changed. So yeah, no problem there. You just get, 1 in the trunk, 2 in the back seat, and then 1 in the front seat. So yeah, very practical as far as the Camaro, it can kind of just do it all. I really like the steering wheel versus the C8 Corvette. The Camaro steering wheel is just, it has everything you need, nothing you don't. It has the almost PlayStation type of interface on the right side where it has up, down, left, right, where the Corvette has more of a wheel selector, which is, being not as familiar with that, a little hard to just, get what I needed out of that little wheel, those two little wheels, I believe, that are on that steering wheel for the Corvette. The space, very usable back seat still. I oftentimes find myself just laying down, I sleep on my side, so I'm able to kind of like curl up in a certain way, throw a blanket and a pillow in the back if I'm if I'm going to be on the road all day, have to run to the city and take care of business. I'm not going to be back till late that night. I could always hop in back, get a couple of winks of shut-eye, and then it's night and day difference, right? If you can just take a little midday nap or whatever you're doing, right? It refreshes me. So that's a huge thing as far as the Camaro, whereas the Corvette, I obviously couldn't do that. However, I do want to note that Corvette, their driver's seat, you can recline that better than you can with the Camaro's Recaro seats. So with the SS1LE, you get those Recaro seats, which are comfortable, but you can't recline them as much as you can with those Corvette seats, which are very comfortable. So I do like the seats in the Corvette. And mods, as far as the Camaro, mods galore. You can basically do anything you want to these cars, whether, you want to do an NA build, or if you want to boost it, either with ProCharger or a traditional top mount supercharger like a Whipple or an Edelbrock or something like that. So you just have so much flexibility with the Camaro as far as mods. Just through all these channels, Race Proven Motorsports being one of my favorites as far as just seeing what you can do with these cars. Endless, basically. Just being in California as well, though, I am limited as far as what I can do to the car, so that's why I keep it stock. All I've really done is just doing little like aesthetic enhancements. I have a cross tower bar going across the engine. I have the Mishimoto catch can. I have the rock guards just to, make the car a little bit more practical. Haven't got to supercharge it yet. If I do end up going the supercharge route, I would probably just upgrade to the ZL1, whereas that's a stock car. It's coming factory like that. With the Camaro, you have the option of doing the 2SS upgrades, which are basically interior upgrades. They don't change the look on the exterior at all or the performance. It's just from the Bose sound system to the interior lighting, more Alcantara in the cabin. And then what I've done recently is got the knee pads and a little bit of the door padding portion. I bought those separately, bought the Alcantara version of those, and it changes the interior a lot. I have the 1SS1LE, so getting that, it just takes a little bit of that plastic that you're touching all the time, and it turns it into Alcantara, which to me really just enhances it, and it's such a worthwhile upgrade. So that's what I have done recently, is I got those 2SS knee pads and door pads right where your window switches are. It was like $300, so I was like, is it going to be worth it? And it actually really was. So that was great. Just being the Camaro, it's just that whole stock car vibe, right? Where it's still a car, but it's still a race car also. So unlike the Corvette, the C8, where it has more of that race car vibe, the Camaro has that muscle car, stock car vibe. It can do it all, right? It can go fast and be a lot more practical and be that traditional front engine setup or you love hearing that engine in front of you too. It threw me off a little bit with the C8, where that engine noise is coming basically right behind your right ear as the driver. I like that sound in front of me. And then also, like, say if anything bad ever did happen, some major accident, all that motor is in front of you, so that'll be absorbing that type of impact if it was a head-on type of thing. So yeah, just that traditional stock car setup is something to be valued still in today's day and age. The HVAC blows plenty cold. That's always great with the Camaro. Just those heating vents down by the shifter in the middle. That's just such a great design. And I think that design will definitely go down in history as just one of the most on point kind of designs as far as the vents. It keeps you cool. It does run a little hot. I've kind of noticed that over, say the first year, the car was still breaking in. So it was running a little hotter, but now it seems like all the seals have really, just closed up and everything like that. And I don't know if it's just me, like a placebo thing, but it seems like it doesn't run as hot as when I first got it. Take that for what it's worth. A huge thing also in the Camaro is like the volume button. It's just perfect. It's right where you want it to be versus the C8's volume button. It's kind of on the top left corner of the infotainment display there. Just to me, it's not in the perfect spot. Whereas the Camaro's volume knob is in the perfect spot. Your passenger can still use it, but also just, every day for the driver to use it. It's where it needs to be, where in the C8, it was like kind of in a weird spot. Like I said, just for those initial 24 hours that I got to use it. Also, the snap, crackle, and pop, right? Camaro SS1LE owners will know. And it's louder than the C8, the Camaro is. Not only do you have a louder exhaust, at least with my MPP exhaust, the 4-tipped exhaust system that came as an option with the SS1LE, you got those snap, crackle, and pops from 2019 on. They changed the tuning a little bit. That's something that I was noticeably missing with the C8 is just that snap, crackle, and pop. That combined with the manual, the 6-speed Tremec, and you even sometimes get a nice pop as you're laying into the car. So it's always a nice, kind of a thing that happens, not always expectedly, but for me that loves it, I just, can't get enough. The heads-up display on the Camaro, I think, is a little bit to my liking more than the C8's also. Kind of a minor thing. They do the exact same thing, but just the design of it, I think, is a lot more straightforward than the C8's, where the C8's just trying to look a little too fancy, where the Camaro's heads-up display is just basically perfect as far as, the RPMs and your speed and then your G's. And then you can also do a few different modes, just as the C8 can, but I just like the Camaro's a little bit more. And it still has a real tachometer, it has a real speedometer, a real tachometer too. The Camaro does. So that's something to be said off of the Corvette's just full digital display, whether it be sport, tour, or track, it's all digital. There's just still something to be said for that over 100-year-old technology. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? So I still have a traditional speedometer, traditional tachometer, and I also have all the digital displays too with the Camaro. So I do like that hybrid system as far as the gauge cluster. The wheels with the Camaro, the SS1LE at least, it comes with 20s. It has that Z01 setup, 285s in front, 305s in back, just that staggered setup. It really does make the car because a normal SS, they don't have as wide of wheels. The stance leaves something to be desired versus the SS1LE and the Z01. And I think for me, the SS1LE is the best looking Camaro, even versus the Z01 or the Z01 1LE. Even the SS1LE is like a little much, just like aesthetically, as you like see it on the road. It's just like, it's already a little much. But then like the Z01 and the Z01 1LE, it's just like, it takes it to that next level to like almost being too much, at least for the street. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love all these cars, but like just as far as like taste is concerned, I love the spoiler on the SS1LE. I love the wrapped hood, and I love the wheels especially. Whereas the Z01's wheels, those are nice too. Those are definitely in like the second place as far as wheels go. And then the front end too. They didn't refresh that front end in 2019 with the Z01. It's the same front end from the entire 6th generation. And even the turn signal lights in front are the traditional kind of halogen style lights were refreshed. SS1LE, they went to total LED. So there's a little bit more of a modernization there with the SS1LE front end versus the Z01 or the Z01 1LE. With that said, I do think the Z01 is the more aggressive looking front end, but like I was kind of getting at, it's just like as far as taste goes and as far as being like too much, you know what I mean, from like your daily driver standpoint, I just think that SS1LE front end with the splitter, with those modern LEDs from the headlight to the running lights and the turn signal lights. It hits all the marks. Alcantara, that's a very enjoyable interior material, and that back seat is also removable too. Being the SS1LE, the back seats for me are just straight leather, whereas the Z01s, the back seats are also lined with a little Alcantara, and then the red seat belts and that sort of thing. The shifter and the wheel are, over these 4.5 years, are starting to show wear. I do have the Alcantara cleaner, Sonax. I do use that from time to time. I don't see it do a huge difference as far as really kind of like making it look new, but it does clean it and keeps all the oil off, and it does help the longevity of that Alcantara for sure. Just being a front engine car, it has the big heat extractor on top, whether it be the SS or the Z01. Z01 even more so, where you're not having that cooling issue or the overheating issue as you were with the C7 Z06, right? Where it's that supercharged C7 version where they had a lot of cars going into limp mode and that sort of thing. Okay, let's talk about the cons of the Camaro. The big con that they speak of with the Camaro is the visibility. Short angled windshield, plus that combined with the seating position goes down to your height also. Probably shorter folk are going to have a harder time with it than say taller folk. I'm 6 foot, and I even think if I was like say 6'1", that it would even be just a little bit better because you can see just a little bit more over that dashboard, which is a high dashboard and high belt line as they like to call it, with like the bottom of the windows and the dashboard kind of all being at that raised level. Just being able to see over that a little bit more naturally helps the overall visibility. But I honestly think the visibility issue in the Camaro is very overblown. That seems to be the main gripe that is talked about, whenever folks review this car, just kind of at a glance. The main visibility issue, honestly, for me is just the A-pillar, and having to almost kind of like lean up in your seating position to really pick that apex of the corner where you want to start turning around, like say, a median or something like that. So that's the main visibility issue for me, is just that A-pillar combined with that high dash. Whereas the rear visibility and that sort of thing, like you use your mirrors, you use your rear view mirror. Those two SSs, they have the blind spot monitoring and that sort of thing. I think that's mostly overblown, but there is a little bit of something to be desired there with the A-pillar and that high dash on the turns where you kind of have to lean up to really pick your spot when you're going for a left or right turn. The front ends, we already talked about that. I think like we said, the Z01 is the most aggressive. I think the SS1LEs is basically the best looking front end. But then you also have the RS and the LT1 front ends. I never really liked how they changed that when they went from 18 to 19. It kind of looks like that stretched netting on that grille look. That was never my favorite front end. So that's a little bit of a con for me, are those lower trim level Camaro front end looks. Another thing is just entry and egress into the Camaro. It's low. It has these long doors, so that's always something you want to be considerate of, whenever you're pulling into a parking place, whether you have enough space to open that door and you can really squeeze out. I obviously like to find a nice spot in the back of the parking lot away from all the cars, and then that's where I like to park the Camaro. But I always do that, and then there's some guy that has to park right next to me, of course, by the time I get out. So it's like, oh man, they better not have gave me a door ding or anything like that. But that's kind of just how life is, right? You try and avoid something and then it just has a way of finding you instead. But knock on wood, haven't had any door dings yet in the Camaro. The skip shift, that's a big topic also as far as a lot of people's gripes. I've learned to live with it over the years. I haven't gotten rid of it like you can with that little chip attachment you can do. You just kind of have to get used to it. A lot of times I'll go from first to third when I feel it engaging, because sometimes that pull into fourth, it can be a little harder, where if you just punch it into third, you have a little bit more RPMs. You're not lugging it so hard with the manual. So I've basically learned to live with it. Hey, it saves me 0.5 gallons of gas over the lifetime probably, but hey, why not? Maybe I'll get rid of it one of these days. It does get frustrating sometimes, but if you do learn to live with it, it's not as big of a deal as people make it out to be. The spoiler options for the ZL1 aren't as good as they could be. I don't really like that pedestal spoiler. It does come out more than the SS's pedestal spoiler, but the SS1LE's dovetail spoiler or blade spoiler, that's basically, you know, the route you want to take as far as, you know, kind of harkening back to those first gen Camaros where that's what they had. Yeah, I do like the SS1LE spoiler, and then the ZL1 1LE spoiler, that's obviously out of carbon fiber and like pretty over the top as far as being a street car with that, but we all know that's not designed to be a street car, right? So, the ZL1 1LE's huge high wing, it still matches the car, so I won't ding it for that, but the straight up ZL1 spoiler I think leaves a little bit to be desired still, but not a huge deal breaker at all. Watching one of Brinka Speed's videos, when he first got his Camaro SS1LE, he was talking about the soft clutch. It just takes a little bit getting used to, just finding out where it engages and disengages. I remember actually taking a SS for a test drive, so it was my first time driving a manual Camaro 6th gen back before I bought my 1LE. I tried to rev it and put the clutch lever in and rev it, whereas I didn't put it in far enough. I kind of lunged the car forward because it wasn't out of gear yet. It's something I think you just have to get used to. The ZL1 I think is a double disc clutch. The best one they're saying is a triple disc clutch, an aftermarket version, but that's when you start getting into the high horsepower, stuff like that. And the shifter is a little stiff, so that's something you do have to get used to, especially from that first to second shift. Also, you know, I always watch those Rady's Rides videos, and he's always talking about the SS or the ZL1 badges being in that bottom left corner of the car in the rear and saying that, oh, that should be on the trunk lid. I disagree. I think the SS and the ZL1 badges are perfectly located, Rady. So yeah, I don't know what you're talking about. They're small. They're not super huge. Just a small little SS and back and front, or ZL1 and back and front is fine, and it's in the perfect spot. The SS kind of matches up with the double exhaust tip on that left side. That's why I like it. The center console, people always kind of like gripe about that too with the Camaro. I think it's fine. It's like I can fit my iPhone and my work phone in there, no problem, in that main area, and then also for like pens and stuff on the extended portion. Yeah, I hear a lot of gripe about that, whereas I think most of it's unwarranted. I think it feels great as far as being usable. Also, it has 2 USB ports versus the C8's 1 USB port, where I can have my Samsung phone, I have my iPhone, both able to be charged and used at the same time, whereas the C8's just has one. There is the manual hood, so I'll kind of revisit that when I talk about the C8, but with the C8, it's all electronic, so you can't just pop a hood in the C8. You have to really almost start knowing secret ways to get at the engine compartment if you need to, if it's not getting power. If the car thinks it's in gear, you can't just pop the hood like the Camaro can. That's one of those things where it's like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. The C8 being a mid-engine car, I'm sure it has different type of safety regulations and that sort of thing. Yeah, I do appreciate still being able to access the engine compartment with the Camaro, whether the car is turned on or off. The brakes, they're not squeaky. It has good clearance, the Camaro. You kind of have to love it. It's still one of those cars where it's highly stylized. Not everyone's going to love it, but if you do love it, you just really love it. Where the C8 is kind of just more for the everyday car enthusiast. It's meant to bring a lot of people into the Chevy performance brand. And I've heard a few times just throughout conversation of people saying, oh, I never liked Corvettes, but the C8, that's a different story. So yeah, the C8 has that more mass appeal, where that Camaro is basically, you know, you really have to love Camaro for that. It is kind of limiting with its appeal to people as far as just being so highly stylized. Getting back to a little bit of a con of the Camaro, that charging pad is basically obsolete as far as my uses. I never used it. I have the 1 SS1LE, so it doesn't make a difference. It didn't come with that, but I wouldn't have a phone that would work with that either. I do like that little cubby compartment behind the center console for my driving gloves and cologne. That's what I put in there. Just a fun little spot to put those things. So that's what I use it for. That's the long and the short of the Camaro. The biggest con, I would say, as far as my car with the Camaro, is the firewall material. and being prone to mice damage. I'm actually going through a big insurance claim with the car right now. It's actually down at my local Chevy dealership, being torn apart. They're dropping the engine, they're pulling the windshield. It was just kind of an ongoing issue with where I live. My truck, I've parked it here for 20 years, never had one issue with mice, but as soon as, you cover this Camaro, you don't really quite know what's going on. Mice basically just trying to take over, trying to live in it. I've found 2 dead mice in the car over the years. What they like to do is come and build nests on top of that cabin air intake and those plenums and that sort of thing. So what they'll do is they'll rip up that firewall and then they'll come use that material to build their nests. You could definitely tell from the smell if mice have been in there. They'll pee on it, pee all over like the inside of the dashboard and that sort of thing. So that's what I'm having being handled right now, is just all those issues. I may have heard the 18s and 19s, they use some kind of peanut oil in their wiring, but to me the issue is more with just the insulation material and the fact it was just so inviting to mice for some reason. So maybe there is something made out of peanut oil in there. They did chew through a wire partially. I taped it up with some electrical tape. It seems like they more just like that insulation material, just something I've had to be constantly aware of ever since. It's been a few years of me having to deal with this now. Obviously, as I got wise to what they were doing, I've been more on it. But when it first started happening, I didn't really quite know just the extent of how much damage they were making, the mice. So I think that's the biggest con for me, is just that susceptibility to mouse damage with the Camaro. I don't know if that is the case with the C8 Corvette. It might be a little different just due to the setup of the car, and there must be some opening or definitely some vulnerabilities as far as mice being able to get in the car with the Camaro. I'll keep you guys tuned with that whole issue, and hopefully my local dealership can sort it out and get some less appealing materials in there once they fix it. Let's talk about the C8 now. I got a chance to rent the Z51 pack Stingray. It was a fun time. Corvette was a great experience up until the end. I'll save what happened in the end till the end, just because I want to get a few things out first. It's a very hot car, right? The Corvette C8. Almost too hot if you're looking to buy one, kind of thing. Been a lot of markup since they came out. Finally starting to cool off a little bit. The overall vibe with the Corvette is it's like a little douchey in a certain way, you know what I mean? And the other way, it's like the vet gets them wet. Rewatched True Lies the other night. Anyone that's seen that movie will get that reference. It does look better, quote unquote, than the Camaro. I mean, it looks more of a race car, right? Instead of that GT look with the Camaro front engine. The Corvette has that race car vibe. It's the mid-engine. It's got the V8. It's got the dual clutch transmission. Just right there alone is such a huge benchmark for American sports cars and for the Corvette. The complete customizable ability for these cars is great. If you put an order in for a new one, you can get basically any color matchup you want, any kind of the stitching and interior stuff, especially with the level 3 pack. It gets really nice in there. I've built a few of my own on the website. It's very fun to explore with that and see what you can do. Whereas with the Camaro, you're very limited. It's either 1SS or 2SS, and 2SS just comes with standard stuff. That's it. You can't really choose within all that. It is what it is with the Camaro, whereas the Corvette, it allows you to do all that customization, which I think is appealing for a lot of folks. The Corvette, the C8 right now, it's brought a lot of people into the Corvette world. It has that mass appeal. I don't really like to follow the trends and that sort of thing. Just the fact that it's so appealing, there's something to be said for that. It's nice when that dual clutch transmission shifts. You'll get that pop too. Kind of like the Camaro, but nothing like as often or anything like that. But you could tell it's the same motor. It has that different intake manifold to give it 50 more horsepower or so. It's a very similar type of feel with that engine. It's a different experience having it behind you. And it is a lot quieter too than the Camaro. So it does sound good, but something like an aftermarket exhaust would be something that I'm sure a lot of people would go for, just because out of the box, the C8's pretty quiet, the Stingray. It's cool that you could see the engine too with the coupe when you get the Targa top. The storage is great too. I mean, for being what it is, you have the frunk in front and then the trunk in back. It's a very deep trunk. Could fit a lot of stuff in it. That's nice. I mean, it's separated, so you're not going to have that like combined storage square feet like you do in the Camaro, where it's all in one place. It's divided in the Corvette. For being what it is, like I said, it's pretty darn practical actually. The hood curves and the visibility is a lot better, I'd say, in the Corvette. It still gives you like a Corvette vibe with the two wheel well humps over the hood. It reminded me a lot of the C7 Z06 I rented too. It still carries a lot of what people liked about the Corvette over to the mid-engine, which I appreciate that they did. Visibility in the rear, it's not so good because you have all that stuff going on behind you. You use your mirrors. You also have like the front end camera too, as far as when you park. So that's a pretty cool thing too that doesn't come in the Camaro. The seats, you have the leather stitching. You can do the carbon fiber. They recline better. They're heated. The HVAC controls are pretty cool, actually. I had a passenger that hopped in and figured it out right away. Doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure it out. The overall accoutrements that come with the Corvette are pretty darn awesome. It also now comes in the hardtop convertible. That's a pretty refined spec. As before, especially like with the Camaro, it's only the soft top. To do an actual hardtop, mid-engine, sports car, V8, DTC, all that, that's such an amazing, cool pack. That's something that we haven't, unless you want to go into the supercar world. That's something that the normal, everyday American hasn't really got to experience yet. So just the things that Corvette has done with this C8 are pretty revolutionary. Overall, it's a great car. I was starting to fall in love with it, but let's go into the cons of it. One of the biggest cons is that you miss the Camaro. Brink of Speed mentioned that in one of his videos when he brought his C8 out after he bought his SS1LE. He's like, oh, I miss the Camaro. There's something to be said for that. It's such a playful car, that Camaro. Also, with just the ease of drivability with the Corvette, is being a manual guy myself, you kind of take pride in the fact that not everyone can just hop in and go. Whereas now it's like the automatics are just so good that you almost kind of don't want everyone and their grandma to be able to just hop in and go as fast as you. Not that they can, but just saying the drivability, the mass appeal of it is a little bit of a diss as far as being a true car guy, a true manual guy. The main thing, I'll bring it up now, is that basically when I rented this Corvette, it was a great experience up until I filled up right around the corner from the owner's house. I filled it up full of gas. I pulled up to the gas station. I was filling it up, parked it normally and everything like that. Put all my stuff in the front trunk. And then when I got to start the car again, it wouldn't turn on. Or basically what happened was the car still thought it was in gear when it obviously wasn't. So it was kind of locked in this like in-between mode where it was kind of on, but wasn't able to start. I wasn't able to pop the frunk to get my stuff. I wasn't able to pop the back to disconnect the battery and stuff like that. I basically had to call the owner and explain him the situation, and then he had to come pick me up, and then that was the last time I saw the car. He filled me in basically is that sometimes happened for the 2020 models. The first year they came out, they had some glitches in the software sort of thing. So that's what happened to me, whereas I'm glad I didn't get stuck out in my last stop, way out in the cuts, before I started to bring it out into town. That would have been a much more difficult situation to get out of. But basically, yeah, just the reliability of those electronics, I was really starting to enjoy, really thinking, man, like this definitely wants to be my next car. But then that electronic thing, that glitch happened, and, you know, it left me wondering. So that's the main thing, is still the reliability in the long run with these cars. Is, you know, they're not as fleshed out as the Camaro is, being 6 years of being in service versus also just the wheels and tires on the base Stingray leave something to be desired. Also the brakes are super squeaky. You know, I let the owner know that also. The Z51 brakes, and he said the mechanic had told him, oh, you know, they're like racing brakes, you know, they're kind of supposed to squeak. But this was like just kind of like way over the line as far as like being tolerable. Whereas like, you know, you're cruising downtown and like the first thing people hear is just like that squeaky, you know, the squeaky brakes. It's kind of just embarrassing at that point. Whereas I haven't had that issue at all with my Camaro. There's a occasional squeak with the Camaro, but it's like this in-between type of pressure that you're putting on. It's only seldom too. Yeah, the squeaky brakes were a piss off too. Oh yeah, well, just kind of on the same topic as the squeaky brakes is just the wheel and tire setup. The Camaro has wider wheels and tires, SS1LE that is. What I think Corvette should do is a C8, basically like a Grand Sport, the NA Corvette, but just raced out a little bit more. Like a C8 1LE type of thing, or a C8 Grand Sport, Whereas I wish they put like a Tremec manual in there and then upgraded the wheel and tire setup, make it a little bit more track friendly. That would be my spec of choice. I'll show you another clip where I bottomed out going over a bump I go over all the time with my Camaro, no problems. But on the C8, I actually did bottom out. So I think the front end especially could use a little bit more robust linkage, or maybe it's too low. And if it's too low, it needs some tightening of the suspension, that sort of thing. It is a pretty soft ride, so it's not as, say, track friendly, I think, even as the Camaro SS1LE, right? Because that was designed for a track spec. And then the availability, right, is still pretty limited. Forget the Z06 or the E-Ray. A local dealership near my area wanted a $250 for the Z06 plus all the fees and taxes and everything. So that was what they were asking, which is pretty high, right? So once you get into that range, you might be thinking about another type of car, McLaren or something like that. Still a great value for the market, but pretty steep price just for a Corvette. Those are the times we're living in though, right? The E-Ray looks really cool too. It's just where things are going in the car industry. It's good for that slow transition that they didn't just go all electric with the Corvette, or at least not yet. Whereas you kind of have the best of both worlds. You have the V8, but then you also have the electronic motor in the front for the more performance aspect of the hybrid system, not so much a range type of enhancer. I'm glad they chose to just go hybrid first and then maybe down the line do a full electric car. Yeah, and then coming back to the interior, the divided cockpit is kind of a con to me. Just having that big center console area with all the HVAC controls and stuff like that. Basically, that space is for the batteries for the E-Ray. So the E-Ray's design dictates how that Stingray was set up. So I just wonder if there's ever going to be like an aftermarket type of electronic system that you can get installed into these things. Even though you might not have an E-Ray, you could put the electronic motors in the front still with the Z06, or sorry, with the Stingray. Because the E-Ray had to accommodate those batteries, the Z06 and the Stingray had to basically compromise their design to be able to do that. So they could just use one body style for every car. That's a little bit of a con, a little bit of a compromise there if you're talking about Z06 or Stingray. But for the E-Ray, of course, that's what it's designed to do. That's why it's there. The rear trunk lid, getting that open or closed, you kind of have to slip your fingers in there, which is kind of weird. At least with the Camaro, there's just a decent space to stick your fingers in if you don't want to put fingerprints on the trunk to do that. Whereas with the C8, you have to kind of like slide it in between the spoiler, and it's almost like a finger pincher. That's something that I wish there was just like a little bit of a handle there, a little bit of like a lip so you could open it a little bit easier than the way it is. We already talked about it's a little bit too quiet of a stock sound for my taste. Owners will probably want to upgrade, get a little louder in the future, whereas stock, my Camaro SS1LE, it's plenty loud. It's not as loud as, some people really want it, but it's definitely louder than the stock C8. We already kind of talked about the display screen button or the volume button. That positioning is a little kind of hidden. I wish it was just a little bit more easier of access. The way the Camaro is, it's right in the middle. It's just right where you think it would be and right where it is. Whereas the C8, you almost have to get used to it. It's not as intuitive type of thing. Just talking about the Targa top in general, is it a pro? Is it a con? It's not a true coupe at that point, right? You can just leave it on there. I think Jay Leno has left his Targa top on one of his Corvette. He's never taken it off kind of thing. You kind of wonder at that point, is it even a desired feature for a lot of people? When I was driving it around, basically the whole time, I left the Targa top off. I just kind of wanted to take it all in. I have the coupe experience every day with the Camaro. I'd left the Targa top off, except at night I put it on just so I can get that full experience of that open cockpit. The Targa top itself, though, it is inconvenient and it is heavy. It's not like heavy, but you know what I mean? It's still a little cumbersome to have to deal with. I could see why a lot of people like Brink of Speed went for just that true convertible hardtop. Just with the press of a button, you can handle it. Even though you're compromising the ability to see the engine. Yeah, so the convertible, you can't see that engine. The engine is close to the ears, so you are hearing more engine noise in general than with the Camaro. The boxy rear end too. A lot of people don't like the rear end for the C8, which I could kind of see. It kind of looks like the Camaro's rear end. I think it kind of harkens back to that C7. Gives it a boxy look, and then especially with those narrower wheels on the Stingray, you want to just see a little bit more tread width when you're looking at that rear end. Definitely the C06 made up for that aspect, but you know, like I said earlier, try and get a hold of one if you only have $250,000. Just it overall being a heavy car still, that probably can contribute to a lot of like the brake fade and that sort of thing. It's not the lightest girl, so there is that, you know, whereas you're comparing it to other cars at that price range. The cars are a lot less, you know, like a Porsche or McLaren or something like that are going to be a lot lighter, so better power to weight. But, you know, they don't have all the accoutrements as the Corvette does. And then also we were kind of getting at the clearance, how high the Corvette is versus the Camaro. The Camaro is high enough so it can get you by as far as the entrances to parking lots and speed bumps and stuff like that. If you hit them right and if you don't like just totally speed over the top of them, I haven't had issues where I bottom out too much. Whereas the Corvette, you're going to have more issues bottoming out. You're going to have to be more careful as far as coming in and out of parking lots. The Corvette I drove in particular, the splitter was significantly damaged and he was just rolling with it because it would just happen again. He was just trying to make the most out of the splitter that he had. That's just something to consider as far as that. I do like where the traction control button is on the Corvette versus the Camaro. The Camaro, it's almost in a dangerous spot where I've hit it multiple times on accident when you're just resting your hand over the shift lever. It's right under the shift lever, whereas the Corvette, that traction control button is a little bit more off to the side and you have to be consciously press it. Whereas the Camaros, you can just bump into it and then all of a sudden, you know, you're out of traction control. And then say, for instance, you gun it. And I did this when I first got the car, that I didn't know traction control was off. And then I was getting on an on-ramp and I lost it. I spun out. Luckily, I didn't hit anything. The infotainment screen, the positioning, it's just kind of a little bit more like they stuck a laptop screen or an iPad screen just kind of right on the top of where they thought it would be most convenient. It's not as integrated into the design of the car as the Camaro's is. It's a little bit less refined. Overall, it's a really great car. It has a lot of potential. Just as the years progress, it's going to become more refined. The next generation of the Corvette, you're going to see that probably smooth out the edges a lot, either literally or figuratively, where it's going to really start to become the potential of this whole mid-engine setup. So the last thing about that Corvette is just the interior setup on the driver's side. It's very cockpit-like, right, where it's all the controls surrounding you, but as a criticism, it's almost like a high chair vibe for a baby, you know, where it's like they're in the chair and then they have their whole table kind of surrounding them, as opposed to like the Camaro where it still has that like more traditional car, like flat dashboard and that sort of thing. Take from that what you will. You do have like that fighter jet vibe. All the controls are around you sort of thing, but then, you know, you kind of almost feel like, what am I doing here? Is this a car still or is this a fighter jet? The identity of the car that you're driving, just take from that what you will. Anyway, those are a few things about the cars I wanted to mention and show you some of these fun clips I had driving both of them. I think you're a winner either way, whether you get the Camaro SS1 Elite or the C8 Z51 Stingray or any Corvette or Camaro for that matter. We're all just big Chevy fans here, so feel free to like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Yeah, we'll just bring you fun content down the road, so thanks for hanging out. Later.